Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange. I'm joined by Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. You can follow them on X right now at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975. And if you're not, make sure you're reading their columns weekly on sportsmap.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit like on this video, support the hometown team, get some good juju going, and hit the subscribe button and maybe the notification bell too, should you feel inclined. That helps support us and get our content now in front of new eyeballs. And we know that over half of the people who watch this are still not yet subscribed. So please join on the bandwagon. Make sure you're getting our content all season long, because we do feel like 2024 is going to be a special year. And if you're new, you should also know that the full version of this podcast is available in audio form right now, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Guys, let's go into the updates, some encouraging pitching updates from training camp. Let's start with that good Christian Javier, Josh Hader, Jose Urquidy, all looked sharp. Justin Verlander looks like he's on track to face live batting. And then the not so good. Fromber got knocked around a little bit, and Forrest Whitley missed a BP session with that middle finger inflammation. He'll be playing catch as early as Tuesday, from what I understand, but we don't know when he will resume actually throwing. So, guys, what stood out to you from the weekend's updates? And Charlie, I'm going to need you specifically to kind of talk me off the ledge on this early Fromber rough outing.
Well, let's go with keyword early. The Astros are one of the most storyless teams in Major League Baseball this spring, which is a very good thing, right? They're not the incumbent American League champions, but they're the reigning American League superpower over the last 7 years. And they're the favorites within the division this year. They're the overall favorites to win the American League this year, which doesn't make it probable that they win a fifth pennant in 8 years, but they're clearly in the mix because the everyday lineup is stout. The starting rotation has a number of question marks, health-related, performance-related, but with a lot of potential answers. And the back end of the bullpen is the best in the game going into the season. And if you're quibbling or fretting over who's going to be the 5th, 6th, 7th best relief pitcher, first world problems, as they say. So Fromber, given the second half of last season and then more stink in the postseason, and he's with a lightened mental approach and wants to be in command and calling his own pitches on the mound, and then he goes out in his first outing and so what? You know, it was one of the first days of March. To me, as long as his arm is sound, if he gets shellacked through the month of March, you wad it all up and throw it out come March 28th. I'm guessing right now he is their opening day starter, because just as a phenom can tear it up in the spring and then gets playing time to start the season and he's back in the minor leagues three weeks later, a guy with a major league track record, granted, the most recent part of that, the second half of last season, not good for Fromber, but there's some bulk over 3 seasons worth that he's a good pitcher. If his arm is sound, yeah, we'll worry about between the ears. But if he gets pasted 2-3 outings this spring, especially if he's experimenting with a couple of different things and getting acclimated to calling his own shots more often than not and getting in sync, you know, the line of security blanket's not here anymore. So Fromber and Yainer Diaz working things out. No ledge necessary. The window should be bolted shut, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the positive stuff. I like that Javier looked good. Velocity looked good. The only issue with him, a couple walks, which we're used to that with Christian Javier. That's just kind of part of what he does a little bit. So that doesn't concern me too much. It's early in spring. He'll get locked in. The guy stealing bases really easily off him does concern me, because we saw that last year. I'm a little worried that can continue into the season. And every time you walk a guy, and he walks a few, if they all end up at second base, that could be a problem. So that's something they're going to have to get figured out. The Verlander news is great. You know, that's what we wanted to see. He's mixing in some breaking balls, some change-ups, starting to work up into shape. So that's all good. And then the Urquidy thing, finally. You know, we talked about the pitch tipping maybe being an issue for him last year. We talked about that on the channel last week. If you want to check out that video, it's up there, guys. Brandon and I discussed that a little bit. So he had another good outing. So maybe some of that stuff's behind him. I understand spring training. Guys aren't necessarily out there racking their brains trying to figure out if guys are tipping pitches in spring training. But it's good mojo going forward that maybe they have addressed the issue. and that he's going to be a guy that you're going to have to depend on this year, especially if Verlander starts off a little slow. JP France still not ready to go. So Urquidy could be someone early in the season you're really going to have to lean on. So all good news on that front.
You mentioned Forrest Whitley. It's been one thing after another. Once the very top pitching prospect in all the minor leagues, at least as a plurality opinion, if not an overwhelming opinion. Now, he's nothing until he proves otherwise at the major league level. So certainly for Forrest Whitley, a downer, but that he has finger swelling, I guess that's better news than if it's a shoulder or an elbow or forearm acting up. It's real good news for Brandon Bielak and Ronel Blanco, because I thought Whitley was going to get every benefit of the doubt to make the team this spring. But since he won't be pitching in games now until March 10th or so, whatever the timetable is on that, I think he's set back and has minor league options. So he's heading to has one more year of minor league options. So he's going to Sugarland. Dylan Coleman hasn't shown really anything other than wildness so far. If Whitley's not on the 26 man to start the season, maybe Coleman gets a spot. But again, we're talking 5th, 6th, 7th relievers. I think Rafael Montero is going to get a chance, in part because of his 2022 season, in part by default, given the other guys in the race, to be that number 4 reliever. And before we fired up the recording machine, Josh, you referenced Brian Abreu won't be available those first 2 games of the season to face the Yankees. So it's going to be an opportunity for a guy or two to make an early impression in the games that matter once that regular season gets here in just over 3 weeks. So there's the best news of all. It's getting here.
Yeah, and on the hitting side, we saw, Yainer Diaz hit a tank. Jake Myers has stung the ball pretty well. You mentioned, some of the guys we had some roster decisions get made who got sent down to got optioned back to the minors over the weekend. Were you surprised to see Jacob Melton? So the real quick trigger on that instead of allowing him to kind of play with the major guys.
Mildly so, right? Jacob Melton is supposed to be the Astros' number 1 prospect now post Drew Gilbert trade. And, that he's not a 20-year-old phenom. You'd like to see him make a leap, but he had zero chance of making the team. Even if he had a big spring, unless there was going to be regular playing time, I mean like 3 starts per week, you want him getting every day at bats at AAA, at least to start the season. And if he's pounding on the door and Jake Myers gets off to a slow start, or you run into an injury, that he could be first one there for promotion. Such a limited number of at bats, he didn't get a chance to blow anyone away or look like, oh, he's a disaster. He looks like he's 2-3 years away, or not even a major prospect. So as opposed to being in and out of the lineup as you try to get regulars some of their at bats and build them up over the remaining 3 weeks of spring training, Melton, obviously, when the minor league games start, will be in there every day, right? The 2 third basemen who could possibly be Alex Bregman's successors a year from now, both sent out. Same thing. They had no chance at playing time with the Astros, so they were earmarked for AAA. Joey Loperfido is still around. Now, a left-handed bat, interesting positional flexibility, all 3 outfield spots, some first base, started 20 games at second base last year. Killed it in AA and then struggled a month at AAA. So I think he's ticketed for Space Cowboy seasoning to start the season. But the guys you think of your best prospects, unless they're going to get to play at least semi-regularly at the major league level, let them start the season at AAA and try to force your hand with excellent performance.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And they have, a lot of outfielders right now with Corey Julks, and they traded for Trey Cabbage. And I'll be curious to see if he plays a little infield. He played over 50 games at first base in the minors last year. I would just wonder if maybe he gets a start over there every now and then, assuming he makes the club. So, yeah, and Pedro Leon, Chandler Rome did a piece about him last week and his kind of long road to the big leagues that we're still kind of waiting on, seeing if that's ever really going to happen. Maybe the organization thinks they should have just kind of left him in the outfield instead of moving him back and forth into the infield. So we'll see if he does something this year. They did commit a ton of money to him when they brought him in, and it just hasn't worked out for him. So it'll be something to keep an eye on. And you brought up Dylan Coleman. I thought it was interesting in Chandler Rome's new piece about, he's continued to be wild. We know that's his MO. He's already walked 4 guys in an inning and a third this spring. So that is continuing, but they think maybe they found something in his setup to where they can get him going in the right direction towards home plate, according to Chandler Rome. So maybe they found something to get him to clean up that wildness, because they could certainly use him. Montero, they're going to need for sure. And then Belak, it was also in that column. He's out of options. So I expect they're going to have to lean on him a little bit early too. So I'd expect to get used to seeing some Brian Belak early in the year.
And everything that we
Belak,
talked about there speaks to the Astros, other than for the individuals involved, right? You make the major league roster, the minimum salary is $740,000. If you're in the minor leagues and haven't signed a big league contract yet, it's about $70,000. Accepting that Jake Myers is going to get the early shot as the predominant center fielder, the critical position battles, they don't exist. Is it Trey Cabbage versus John Singleton for the last man? A couple lefty sticks. Cabbage with 8 strikeouts in his first 13 spring training at bats. Well, failing to make contact's been a story of his in the minor leagues. We know it's been part of why Singleton has never made it in the major leagues. But if it's the last man on your roster, Cabbage offers you infield, outfield, first base, and outfield flexibility. I think Greg Kessinger is probably making the ball club because he can play anywhere in the infield. And in an emergency, you could stick him in left. And of course, you have Mauricio Dubon. But we know who their 9 primary guys are starting the season. Then you have Victor Caratini and Mauricio Dubon. And that leaves 2 spots left. I think Kessinger gets 1, and that leaves the epic Cabbage-Singleton battle. Not exactly affirmed versus Alydar for horse racing aficionados from the late 70s, and I know I count both of you guys in that.
And speaking of Corey Julks, he also ran into one over the weekend, so it was nice to see that from Corey. And there's a reason why the Jacob Melton storyline is more relevant than ever. And we're going to talk about that in part 2 of the podcast. And to listen to the full podcast, it's up right now at your favorite podcast provider. And to watch part 2 of our conversation, just go on YouTube, just go to the Stone Cultures playlist. We'll be releasing that video tomorrow. And as always, go Stros.